thank you for joining us again. And as promised, we're coming to you with a year-end review and a look at what might be on the horizon next year. How are you today, Ciarán?
I'm good, and it was only when I was prepping for this I just realised how significant this year has been and historic. And just in not very short numbers, we have experienced 3 British prime ministers, 2 Taoiseachs, and 1 historic election, plus everything else that has went on. So it's been quite the year. And just before I start, Greg, I'd also like to thank all the people who helped us throughout the year. I also just working out where we have been, and we've been in Washington, New York, San Francisco, Chicago, Philly, Albany, Sacramento. We've covered coast to coast in Canada, from Vancouver, Calgary, Ottawa, Toronto, Montreal, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland. So for all the people who opened their doors, opened their venues to us, came and met with Sinn Féin spokespersons, just thank you for the year, for all your support throughout the year, and making this what has been a politically significant year, a hugely influential year in terms of the US in Ireland.
Yeah, a fantastic review of those numbers. I thought perhaps you were going to give us a new Christmas carol there with three British prime ministers, two T-shirts. Let's start off with a look. Yes, right. Let's start off looking at the elections. We'll begin looking at one of the biggest and most historic outcomes in history, right? As well as we can compare that with 18 months of continued polling that shows Sinn Féin at the top of the polls. That's an incredible run of consistency and history making.
Yeah, well, I'll start, I suppose, in the south, because that's where the polling is probably most significant. Because in the north we did have an election, and we actually have real numbers and real elected representatives. But in January 2020, or in February 2020, there was a general election in the south, and Sinn Féin emerged as the largest party, just over 25%. Since then, not only have we consolidated that vote, but it's actually grown. Sinn Féin is now the largest party in the Dáil. It's also, in terms of polling, we have consistently polling now around 33 to 35%, and have opened up a 10-point lead over the other parties. The other very significant part of that was Mary Lou McDonald, the Sinn Féin president, was the first woman to lead the opposition and the first Sinn Féin member. And we'll come back maybe that, Greg, when we talk about what the politics of the South, because that forced Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, who have controlled both opposition and government for the last 100 years, into a coalition government solely held together on the basis of keeping Sinn Féin out. So polling-wise in the South, we've consolidated and grown, and are now by far the lead party. In the North, there was a very significant election in May. Sinn Féin became the largest party in the North, which is hugely significant. Michelle O'Neill, our vice president, became the first minister-elect, the first non-unionist to hold that position in the history of the state. And to put it into its historic context, when Ireland was divided, when it was partitioned, the north of Ireland, the 6 counties in the north, were gerrymandered, and it was in the belief that they could sustain a perpetual unionist Protestant majority. At that time, it was divvied up in terms of religious head count. It was 66% Protestant and 100% Unionist. There was no place in that society for my family, for my parents, for my grandparents, who were Irish citizens and identified as being part of the Irish nation. All of that was turned around in May, and you've now got Sinn Féin, an Irish Republican, is leading the largest party and would be leading the government if it was established in the north. So hugely influential. And just by the by, there was a census report came out, and that was the first census report that showed that there was a Catholic majority in the north too. So it's all changing historically. All of those are just way markers for the changes that are happening on the ground across Ireland, and particularly in the north.
Yeah, and I think that is a interesting way to describe and highlight the contrast between this consistent, steady, stable growth and a trend that we can see. And on the other side, as you mentioned at the top, 3 prime ministers, 2 Taoiseachs, endless instability. What has it been like what has that meant to people on the ground? What has it been like trying to work with and trying to navigate such instability and inconsistency?
The biggest challenge over the past year has been the same challenge we had the year before and the year before that.
Yeah.
And that is the British government. And as you said, there's been 3 British prime ministers in the past year. There's a huge amount of turmoil in Westminster. And it all comes from Brexit, is, if you like, the indicator of it. But the British government became English nationalists, if you like. And it was all about what was best for the Tory party and for the British government. That created the instability of Brexit, which had an impact on the north of Ireland. So that's the biggest destabilising piece, and that is that the British government have consistently taken unilateral approaches. But it's not just restricted to Brexit. They also brought forward this year a notorious piece of legislation, and it was to deal with the legacy of the conflict. So we emerged from the longest period of sustained conflict in Irish history with the Good Friday Agreement in 1998. There was a lot of hurt on all sides, and it's to try to find a way to reconcile ourselves to that past and to move past that hurt and find healing. There was an agreement signed in 2011 at Stormont House, 2014 at Stormont House, and even in January of 2020, there was another agreement which meant that should have been implemented within 100 days. The British government bent all that, and they have brought forward their own proposals, which are opposed by the Irish government, proposed by the US Congress, proposed by the UN, opposed by the UN, opposed by the Congress, opposed by all parties and victims groups. And what that legislation will do will stop victims having access to the courts, will close down all investigations and block inquests. And just think about that. I mean, inquests are just a common factor of the judicial process of dealing with people's deaths and people being bereaved. They're now being blocked. So that is the biggest destabilizing point in terms of managing what's happening within Ireland and undermining the Good Friday Agreement, without a doubt. And by the way, the approach of the British government sustains the rejections within the unionist community who have blocked government for the past year.
And this, just to be extra clear, 2014, Stormont, and 2020, I think, is that new decade, new agreement. These are agreed to by the British government when they're at the table there, and then when they leave the table, they go and submit legislation that undoes all of that effort and commitment and negotiation.
Absolutely. So it's a unilateral approach, and the success of the Good Friday Agreement has been that both governments and all parties came together, reached an agreement, and those agreements should be implemented. The British government have stood outside that. And by the way, it's not just about breaking agreements, it's about breaking international law. And Brexit is about breaking their agreement with the EU unilaterally. Yep. And on the legacy issues, it's about breaking the Stormont House Agreement, the January 2020 agreement, but also fundamentally undermining the human rights commitments of the Good Friday Agreement, which were agreed and endorsed by the people north and south almost 25 years ago.
So that is a review of how historic this year has been in 2 different manners, right? We have the consistency, continued growth, and record-breaking and history-making elections and polling, as well as continued scrambling and inconsistency. If it's all right to take a peek at what that means about what 2023 might look like, taking a look at the year ahead. I know that in 2022, the work of establishing citizens' assemblies and the planning for Irish unity has really taken some great leaps ahead. Can you talk about what that has looked like and what that might look like moving forward?
Yeah, on the unity piece, this year was also hugely significant. There was a number of very important events. One in particular struck me, and I attended it. There was over 5,000 people attended a conference in the 3 Arena in Dublin. And not only did they attend, they paid to attend. Yeah. And that's highly unusual for Irish people to pay to attend a political event. Yeah. And at that event, there was 10 political parties who all talked about their hopes for Irish unity and how the process should develop. So it's a very, very live issue. Yeah. So I mentioned the changes, the demographic changes and the political changes are underway. But there's also debate, and the debate is very much about the future and how we can, where we're best placed, north and south, across all communities what the future looks like. There's been books have been published this year, 3 books at least have been published about Irish unity in the process of that. And maybe we'll come back again, Greg, and talk about the books and try to get some views. There's been polls, there has been academic research. So it's very much a live debate. And it's happening.
Yeah.
And I was struck by there's this notion of will it happen, will it not happen? And there was a report on the news 2 weeks ago, and it was about flood defences. Mm. And I could see you looking at me, Greg, going, what has flood defences got to do with Irish unity? The engineer who was unveiling these flood defences says, you know, we build these for a once in 100-year occurrence. We are facing into the very real possibility of Irish unity, of securing an Irish unity referendum provided for the Good Friday Agreement. And yet we have an Irish government that refuses to prepare for that debate.
Yeah.
And this could be landing us within 5 to 10 years easily. And not only do they refuse to prepare, they also refuse to even advocate for Irish unity. So you'd almost think, listening to some Irish government officials, that they're uninvolved in the issue, or they have no say in the matter, or they have no position.
They're observers or bystanders. Yeah.
And the change that was made to the Irish Constitution made it very clear that Irish unity is the will of the Irish people to be determined by referendums north and south. But so that's the key piece. So what will be a big challenge is getting the Irish government, 1, to become advocates for unity, and 2, to actually begin to prepare and plan. Yeah. And if we put together flood defences for once in 100-year occurrence, I think we should be able to put together a plan for something that could be with us within 5 years. And not only that, one in which we have a stake in which we can create something good from. And
make a clear plan for. I think we can maybe joke that even the dam builders in the street see what's coming, right? They're even aware. But also the lessons learned of moving forward with major national change without a plan, we can see clearly what happens at Brexit and see what happens if you just don't have a plan at all, rather than say, let's talk about what happens with flood defense and the postal service and highway maintenance and all of these things that need very boring and very essential meetings to talk about.
Yeah, but it's just that every government should have contingency plans and being prepared.
Yeah,
is the very basic. But an Irish government should be advocates for Irish unity.
Yes,
you know, we should be building the vision for a United Ireland.
That's right.
You know, these are parties that proclaim to be Irish Republicans or United Irelanders.
Yeah,
who draw their lineages back to 1916 and beyond. So this is within the grasp of this generation. So they need to plan for it. Now, that's what Sinn Féin would do.
Yeah.
If we were leading an Irish government or an Irish government, and it's what we would expect a Fianna Fáil and a Fine Gael government to do.
If thinking about building bridges or connecting in that way, you'd start at the top here with so much gratitude and specifics about the ways in which Irish America and supporters all over North America have been essential to this. There has been a great deal of movement on this side as well. We have a new Congress taking their seats here in the coming weeks. President Biden has appointed a new envoy. Let's talk a little bit about what that might mean for 2023, and maybe specifically how that might shape the actions of Irish America or folks in North America.
Well, again, it comes down to, there's a number of issues that we're going to face, and they all come back to the same issue, and that is, 1, stopping the British government taking unilateral actions, and very simply implement agreements that have been made.
Yeah.
So what we would expect and what we would hope, and what the position of Congress and the position of every US administration has been, is that the Good Friday Agreement, which is 25 years, it's its anniversary next April, that it has delivered so much, but there's still a huge potential for it to do so much more. And it's as relevant today as it was 25 years ago, and it'll also be the pathway for our future. So what the US government can do, and what a US envoy can do, is just to have that conversation with the British government. Live up to your obligations that were agreed, whether it's to do with legacy issues, whether it's to do with reconciliation in the past, whether it's to do with Brexit. Our wives to do with the concept of Irish unity and having that plan. And I think that's the strength that the US can bring to it. It's almost like, I don't want to say the referee, but the co-guarantors have taken on that role of guarantors of the agreement. Irish Republicans have abided by every agreement that we have made and entered into. We would expect the same of the Irish government, of the British government. So I think that's the high level politics. I think that's where the US government is are. And everybody, it's not just about dealing with the crises of today or the issues of today. Looking down the pipe, looking at the next 5 or 10 years, how do we navigate that process so that it's democratic and peaceful?
Yeah.
And I think that the US has got a role in that. And coming back then, I think US activists have got a role in that. People who have an interest in Ireland, people who support peaceful development, all have a role to play in shaping American foreign policy. And I have to say as well, Canadian foreign policy, because we'll share this with our Canadian colleagues. So it's all to play for, and it's a huge opportunity. We also have to deal with the very immediate issues of Brexit. We have to deal with the immediate issues of getting the British government to bend their legacy proposals and move back to what was agreed at Stormont House. So there's a lot to be done. And I do think you could take some solace about what the US has achieved. It has caused the British government to pause.
Yeah.
And to create that space where agreements can be reached. They were going to just fire ahead in terms of Brexit, the way they imposed Brexit. They were going to overturn the protocol. They were going to impose this legacy piece and ban families from getting access to the courts. All of that can be paused by the intervention of the US, Canada, and international players in this.
And that gets stronger when activists are engaged, are staying in touch with what's going on, are aware of developments. I know that in concert with the 25th anniversary of the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, we could look ahead to some events in the States and in North America. Is that right?
Yeah, so we're putting together a program now of events to market, but it's not. And Jerry Adams has been very clear about this. These issues shouldn't be a lap of honor. They shouldn't be just a look back and congratulating each other on what we've achieved. And there's been a huge achievement. As I said, Ireland has changed hugely. Belfast, where I grew up in the 70s and 80s and 90s, is a completely different place today, and it's better for it.
Yeah.
But the Good Friday Agreement is just as relevant today in terms of respect for the rule of law, respect for order, respect for the rights of individuals, and the democratic right of the people to determine their own constitutional future. And all of that is just as relevant today. A certain primacy of politics over the threat of violence. All of that is as relevant today and will be just as relevant tomorrow. So I think that's where we will be. Yes, we'll be celebrating what we have achieved over 25 years. But we also have to be looking forward. Where do you want to be in 25 years?
Yeah.
Where do you think you'll be in 25 years? How do you maintain the progress that we have experienced to date? How do you keep it going? And all of that comes back to those fundamental principles of a certain primacy of politics.
Yeah, it provides a clear path for the resolution of sticky points or conflict, or what do we do next? That's in the text of the Good Friday Agreement. It's not a matter of what do we do now, that they're revisiting and sitting with this at a moment that says, hey, let's reflect on this, allows for a light to be shown on a way forward. It's not as if we haven't thought about these things. We've thought about them, dug in, and there is a plan.
Yeah, and it's always worth reminding people that it wasn't just a high-level political agreement between parties and governments. And it is an international agreement and written into international law. But it also went to the people in referendums, north and south, and was endorsed by the people with a huge majority.
Yep.
So it's not down to one party to have the right to rewrite what was agreed by the people 25 years ago. And that's hugely significant. No party's got the right to determine that. And you hear people say, oh, the Good Friday Agreement's dead or it's no longer relevant. The will of people still maintains.
Yeah. Yeah. So as that as these events become into sharper focus, and as we find ways to carve out time to reflect and revisit the text and the agreement, we will be sure to put out information and news about events happening all across North America. If you are not subscribed to our newsletter, that is the best way to follow along with any events. There's also a new form on our website and on our link tree. If you're interested in learning more or getting involved, you can fill out that form and we'll be in touch as these events unfold. Ciarán, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, Greg, and just looking at the 25 years, I think we should also open it up that if people want to contact us about ideas that they have about how to market, that is there resolutions at councils, at city councils and state level, that they would like to push for, just to market, but also to say how important this has been. And you can never come away from it. Like, it's hugely significant in my life and in the life of the Irish nation. But it's also fundamentally probably the greatest US foreign policy achievement of a generation, or maybe two.
Yes.
It has worked and it has sustained and it has endured. So there's that to be done. And as I say, supporting a Good Friday Agreement, celebrating the Good Friday Agreement, and also looking ahead to what can be done. And the challenge for us is about the future.
That's right. And the best way to do that would be to visit our website. There's a form on that website to say, I want to get involved, or on our link tree. It's the second link on Linktree to say, fill out this form, and that will you can share your ideas with us and give us some content information. We'll be in touch. So grateful to you for taking the time here as the year wraps up, as Christmas decorations are going up, as it's the end of the year, as we get ready for some wonderful holidays. Thank you so much to all of our listeners and our viewers this year. We are looking forward to continuing this next year. We are so grateful to you for your support and for tuning in. Thank you. Ciarán, any last words?
Hopefully I'll see you somewhere along the road.
That's right.
We've got a busy schedule of meetings and visits for the year coming, both across the US and Canada. And I mean, I will always come back to this. This is a hugely, people look at the challenges. There are challenges ahead of us, but it's a hugely exciting time to define a new Irish nation, to unite Ireland and create something a new and united Ireland and break with the past. That's a huge responsibility, but it's also a very exciting time.
Great opportunity, indeed.
Hopefully I'll see us all. Nula Conative, Gormagad for all the work that was done this year, and hopefully I'll see you along the road next year.
Very well. Thank you so much. Happy New Year. Merry Christmas.
Happy New Year.